Welcome to season 2 of the Bigger Than You podcast, your go-to weekly podcast that blends energetics and mindset to help you do whatever it takes to bring your vision to life, whilst having fun on the way. I'm Jenna Holloway, your host and multi-award-winning intuitive hypnotherapist and mindset coach. My purpose is to help mission-led business owners and visionaries who want to inspire change by leading the way in a space that otherwise may feel unnerving and too difficult. This is Bigger Than You. Everybody, thank you so much for joining me. I have a wonderful guest for you guys today, and I would love to introduce you to Dr. Sarah. Dr. Sarah is a clinical psychologist, trauma bond specialist, and relationship coach. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited for this conversation too. We were talking just before we hit record. I know there's so much that's going to come out. So before we kind of get into like the nitty gritty of what we want to talk about, could you just give everybody a little background of who you are, how you came to do what you do, just a general introduction?
Yeah. So I've been working in mental health services now for, probably nearly 15-ish years. But the reason why I went into the specialism of trauma bonding is because I have had personal experiences of trauma bonded relationship, and what was really insightful is that you don't really realize the impact of it until you're out of it. And even then, the impact of it really lingers around. And so it was interesting because I think I went through this phase where I was looking at so many people around me in my personal life, in my professional life, my clients, staff that I was working with, and I could see it coming up in a lot of different places. And what's funny is that a lot of people don't necessarily recognize the signs of it. But my God, it affects your very being, your very core, and it affects just how it is that you live the rest of your life. So yeah, I'm really embodying my personal mission in terms of supporting people on that. So got my own clinic. I am going to be starting a group soon, and I've been setting up retreats as well for the past year, also helping people to heal from trauma bonds and toxic relationships.
Wow, sounds amazing. Amazing work. I know that people are generally familiar with what trauma means in terms of things that actually, no, I'm not going to assume that information, because I was going to ask you, can you just like define what you mean by trauma bond? But actually, could you go back one step and define trauma in the sense of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think that's super important. So the word trauma gets battered about quite a lot. And I think the clinical definition of it has changed over time. But ultimately, we have big T traumas and little t traumas. So it's kind of a range. So big T trauma would be something that is life-threatening, something that is really significant. And it could even be vicarious big T trauma. So what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you're in a situation that you almost died in, or you saw somebody who either had passed or nearly had passed in a particular situation. So it could be a road traffic accident, or it could be a serious case of domestic violence and abuse. A little t trauma is slightly different in the sense that it's something that happens quite chronically. So it's something that happens repeatedly, time and time again, which in itself can be traumatic, but it is something that is not potentially life-threatening as much as a big T trauma. So it could be the repeated experience of criticism, or the repeated experience of verbal aggression, or the repeated experience of neglect, of feeling rejected, of feeling judged negatively. And actually, little T traumas are incredibly common, particularly in the corporate world. And it is also very normalized, which ends up leading to this really, really toxic environment. And don't want to go too much into a tangent here, but then that also leads into areas like toxic positivity, where people are like, hey, let's be really, really positive about everything all the bloody time. And it's kind of like hammer hard and this hustle mentality and all of this stuff. But actually, if you look at the background in terms of what's operating underneath that, is that there is this forever sense of, I must do better, I must push harder, I am not good enough, I am not worthy enough, I'm not valid enough, I'm not valued enough, or all of the not enoughs. And the causes that lead us to that state, that would be trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you said something about a lot of it is normalized, so much around parenting. I just want to say this from being a mum and the way that I choose to parent now, and how everything is different and changed since, when we were kids, is just an awareness of the words that we use and the things that are banded around as normal but actually cause trauma. Like, for example, threatening to leave your toddler as a way to get them to come with you in the park, to a 2-year-old who's literally sees their mum saying, bye, see you later, to just try and get them to leave, depending on the child. But actually, that can be traumatic.
Yeah, and it can be traumatic. I'm completely on board with that. And I think people, as adults or as parents, having a child is hard, right? And so it's kind of, I don't think you
we
quite
don't know what we don't know, do we? And so this is why conversations like this is so important, so that we can just become aware and do better. So, like, if you've ever done that, just to say, don't worry about it. We're always doing our best. But yeah, knowing about this kind of thing and just what trauma is and how commonly we all have trauma. That's something really, like, I want to put through on this podcast, is that every single person as an adult will have trauma and healing to do, even if you don't think you do, because a lot of it is invisible, especially, my personal story as a high achiever. The reason I became a high achiever was down to trauma. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize, like, I lived my whole life as a high achiever and then did some healing work and had no idea. But the reason I was such a high achiever was because I had this belief, subconscious belief, that I wasn't worthy unless I was achieving. And so that's the thing that was driving me. And so, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And I think it's far more common in people who are objectively successful. And so people who become financially wealthy, who become successful in their careers, who become really senior, or who own their own company, multiple companies, whatever it might be. So from what I can remember, and it's really annoying because I don't have the name of the researchers around this, but from what I can remember in terms of recent data, what it shows is around about 89% of high achievers do have some level of significant trauma. And so the trauma tends to be around, so this is really simplified, but it's kind of divided into two big categories. So there's a category around attack, and then there's a category around absence. So the category around attack is this sense of criticism, this sense of judgment, this sense of expectation and standard, and really falling from that. So if you are not doing X, Y, and Z, if you're not at this particular standard, whatever it is, and the standard is objectively measured, then you're a disappointment. Then you're a little bit shit. And so, and the thing is,
it's so common as well.
Yeah,
all it takes is a throwaway comment. Like let's just imagine then you normally get full marks on a test in school, and then you don't get full marks one day, and one of your parents means well, but basically is like, makes a joke about it, or much worse, actually does say that's not good enough. But it can, like, the trauma can actually even happen when it's meant well, but it's misinterpreted by the child. Like, just that one single throwaway comment can be enough to ingrain this belief that I'm never good enough unless I'm getting 100%. And in comes the identity of perfectionism as an adult, I don't think, I'd love to know what you think on this, but I don't think you can identify as a perfectionist and not have some kind of trauma, because we shouldn't be perfectionists. It's an identity that we have come to have as a way to keep ourselves safe.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't ever identify as a perfectionist unless there was something to heal. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I see quite a lot, so even if we look at personality traits, right? And so, I mean, I don't know whether you ever do personality trait assessments with your clients, or I know that some businesses use it quite a lot. And so clinically, I have a lot of issues with a lot of the personality assessment traits because they're not very well executed and there's a lot of factors that they don't control for. But regardless, the thing is that we've got a couple of very clear-cut personality traits, right? So we've got the perfectionist who, whatever it is that they do, they have to do to the utmost possible of their abilities. And even then, it's not very good. So they just keep striving more and more. And the thing is, it's interesting because it's helped them survive, or it's helped them get to the stage in life of where they're at because they've become exceptionally good at what it is that they're doing. And so they literally stand above the crowd, right? And so they're doing really well and they get really praised, they get acknowledged, they get their accolades and all of this. And so why would you not keep that trait going, right? Because it has literally helped you survive, particularly if you're growing up. So people who tend to have the perfectionistic trait, they tend to be people who've grown up in households whereby their parents were exceptionally high in terms of their career or high in terms of their financial income status, whatever it might be. Or it tends to be people who grow up in households whereby there was a lot of demands made.
Yeah.
And so if you were not meeting the expectations, and the expectations would be really unrealistic, and it could be across different areas, then you would be punished or you'd be criticized, you'd be seen as a disappointment. So just something I want to point out, which I find really fascinating, is that often these things are cross-sectional. So in the sense of, let's say a random example might be if you grew up in a household whereby your parents were really strict in terms of you exercising, the way that you look, your body weight, actually that could lead to perfectionism in your career. Even though they're two different domains, like your body weight and your career are different, but you would still develop that high standard, that unrealistic, unachievable high standard.
Yeah.
But, we've got other personality traits where trauma has also been involved. So there is the achiever personality trait, which is a bit different to the perfectionist. So that's somebody who has to achieve a lot in so many different domains, and they might end up having like 10 different businesses or have tried like an ample number of businesses, and they have got loads of accreditations, they've got loads of qualifications, they've done this and this and this, and yet it never seems to satisfy. There's always some void that they just find.
Yeah.
And again, that void reflects their trauma. Or there are business owners or people in general who are just normal employees who are peacemakers and they're helpers. And so this is also a significant trauma response, because you learn through traumas that you can only ever be safe if you keep everybody else around you happy.
Yeah.
And so you kind of forget about your own needs because your needs equal the person in front of you's needs. Like the person in front of you, like as long as their needs are met and you make sure that they're super happy, then you can kind of, your duty is done and you can, there's nothing left.
Yeah. And a really common way to identify this is if you find it hard to put yourself first and have self-care. If you feel guilty when you're putting yourself first, that is a really clear sign that there's some work to do there, because you shouldn't feel guilty about speaking your mind or taking time for yourself. And it's really valuable, the work that I do and how it influences the way that I parent and the things that I say to my girls, because it would be so easy to, quote unquote, make my life easier as a parent if I tried to get my girls to, I've got 4-year-old twins. So if one, I can't think of an example now, but if one wants to borrow something of the other, I always try and get them to speak up for themselves, because one doesn't have to give the other one her thing if she doesn't want to, because we respect other people's values, opinions, and everything. So I'm playing the long game in my parenting by getting my children to not be people pleasers. It's really important that they value themselves, and the way that I'm bringing them up to do that is, it is a long game, but it's so, so important because, well, we could go on forever about how it's so important, but yeah, like most people, most adults on some level are people pleasing unless they've done work on themselves, because of the experiences we've had growing up, the things that are just so normalized.
Yeah. I've got, you just reminded me. So I've got a client who is exceptionally successful in her field, and she's got a retail brand and extremely successful. And it was interesting because I had a session with her, actually, I think it was last week, and she made a throwaway comment about her getting her nails done. And she said, "Oh, I've been so selfish." It was such a throwaway comment. And I was like, oh, let's just backtrack on what
I'm like that with my clients. I don't let something like that pass, because it's evidence, isn't it?
Yeah, because you know what? I think these subtleties speak far louder than the big words that we're trying to say, right? And so it's often about what is not being said. It's often about the things between the lines that's actually really important, right? Because the subconscious operates 95% of our behaviors. And I'm sure you know that, like, I'm sure you bang on about this all the time. All the time, right? Because no, but seriously, it's so important though, right? And so the thing is that it's almost like we're asleep. Like, all these humans that are walking the earth are asleep. And, that goes to every single level. And when you recognize that actually you've been asleep, it's quite shocking, because there are so many things that you let slide, or there's so many things that you do on autopilot, and you don't really recognize just the level of impact that it has. And I think one thing as well, talking about parenting, I think one thing as well that a lot of parents get mixed up, and with full good intentions, but what they get mixed up is that they start learning about the stuff, right? And then they teach their child what is healthy and unhealthy. Okay. And that is much better than not being aware and not teaching them. But the bit that's really important is actually modeling to your child. Because the thing is that kids learn far, far more from observing you, from seeing how it is that you interact with other people, but not only that, how it is that you treat yourself. They see that so much more than they hear the messages that you're trying to give them, right? Because it's the same message as go brush your teeth. It's the same message as like, oh, we need to do your laundry. It's the same message. And so it's not, if they're having 100 different messages from you in a day, that one message of respect yourself isn't really going to land that much compared to the other stuff. Whereas actually they observe. And sorry, it's making me think of another client of mine. So I had someone else who I work with, and she's a manager of a particular, she's manager of her company. I'm trying to maintain confidentiality here. Anyway, she's a position of manager, and very intelligent woman. And she came to me, so she's got a 7-year-old daughter, and she was telling me one session that she was having this conversation with a 7-year-old, and they were talking about careers, and her daughter said, "I really want to be a hairdresser." And the mum, my client, said, "Okay." And my client, and she was aware, and she was trying her best to be encouraging, because she was like, you know what? I want to make sure that my kids are happy. I want to make sure that, she can do whatever she wants and all this stuff. And she said, "You can do what you want." But she was absolutely not convinced, right? And so even though the objective words, if we did a transcript, would say you can do what you want, but actually the tone, her body language, the stuff that was unspoken, she was not okay with it, because she saw that as being beneath her or being inadequate, that it wasn't good enough, that actually she should be more intelligent, she should be striving more, that her standards should be higher, and the expectations and all of that stuff. And the thing is that the daughter didn't even hear the message of you can do what you want. The daughter felt really upset in that moment. And my client couldn't understand why, because she was trying her very best to give the message. But actually, it was because, and this was quite early on in her journey when we were working together, she couldn't really understand it. And it was because she hadn't really sat down with herself to really do that internal work and to really process some of those past traumas, but also the relational aspect of it. So I suppose one thing that I mean, like you mentioned, like you introduced me, is my specialism is in trauma bonding. And so what is trauma bonding versus a trauma? Well, a trauma bond is ultimately when you're in a relationship with somebody, and that could be a partner, it could be a parent, it could be a child, could be co-worker, friend, whoever. But ultimately, you're in a relationship with somebody where you go through a cycle of affection and love, but then you hit abuse and you hit criticism and you hit something that doesn't feel very clear. And then you make up again. And then there's this bit of love. There's like a honeymoon phase, and then you dip again. And you kind of go through this like love-hate relationship. And there's a lot of pushing and a lot of pulling. And so sometimes we can see it on a really clear-cut scale, but sometimes actually it's a bit more subtle. And so it's really common within households, within a parent-child dynamic, whereby parents haven't resolved their own past traumas. Yeah. And so what happens in that moment is that the parent shows a lot of love, shows a lot of affection and praise to the child when the child does well.
Yeah.
But then also out comes the criticism when the A+ grade or the 100% grade or, whatever it is, isn't present. That's when the emotions start to dip, and that's when the hints of criticism come up.
Yeah, I'd also love to add an example to that is when everything's going well. And again, like I say this with absolutely no judgment, every single parent is always doing their best with the resources they've got. And what that means is the amount of healing work they've done or not done on themselves. So if you haven't done the healing work, when you're like, everything can be great, you can have the best relationship with your child, but when they start to kick off, you are triggered and you start to act like the parent you don't want to be because you are triggered. So you can find yourself, even though you don't want to, you can find yourself saying things that were said to you that you don't like. You don't want to say that, but you literally can't help yourself because you're triggered.
Yeah.
And that is really, really hard. Like I coach business owners, but like I've said before, I coach on all sorts. It's not just about the business, it's about the person in front of me. And so this has come up quite a few times with my clients where they're triggered by their own kids. And unless you've done that work to heal that within yourself, it's very hard to be the best version of yourself when you are triggered. So if your actions communicate that your child is not lovable when they are having a hard time, then that is going to need healing for that child in the future. That's my story. That we're literally talking about validating kids' emotions, whatever those emotions are, the really big, ugly, hard ones, those need validating too. The child needs to know that they are loved regardless of how they are going to be. And that is really, really tough to do, especially if you are stressed and especially if you've not done your own healing work. So if you're listening and you know that you find it really, really hard to stay calm when your kid is giving you a hard time, just a couple of tips that really help me is to, number one, see them. If this is your experience, by the way, if you didn't have your feelings validated as a child, see your child as the little you. So that you, in that moment when that's really, really tough, you can parent them the way that you wish you were parented. And the other thing to keep in your mind during those really hard times, those really hard moments, is to know that they are having a hard time. They are not giving you a hard time. And to remember that you are on their team. And I don't know about older kids. My kids are only 4 years old at the moment. But whenever they are kicking off, usually it's at the end of nursery or, there's some kind of need where like they're tired or whatever. They're not the best version of themselves, but they feel safe to kick off around me, because, you know, I am their safe place and I do validate their emotions. And so, like I said earlier, I'm playing the long game with the whole gentle, respectful parenting. But 9 times out of 10, they just need to feel seen and feel heard. So validating their emotions in those difficult moments is such a, like, I don't know what the word is. It takes the wind out of the sails in the way that, like, it de-escalates the situation. This is turning out to be quite a parenting episode. Didn't realize that this was going to happen, but I really hope that it's helping people.
Yeah, no, I was, you know what, I was thinking the same. I didn't realize it was going into parenting, but one thing that I'd like to add on that is that, so recent research has also shown that mums experience their child, so their child acts 800% worse.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that.
Towards their mum compared to the next person, right? And if it's a 2-parent household, the next person likely to be dad, but then that's still at like 100%. And so part of the reason for this is because actually what happens is that as children grow, like when you imagine, okay, so you mentioned about a 2-year-old and your parent says, right, I'm going now. And actually that's really distressing for a 2-year-old. And it's really distressing because you are their world. Yeah. Like that is it, right? And their world is collapsing. Their world is literally leaving right in front of them. So that's really distressing. The thing is that as children grow older, they become more aware that they're going to be developing a social identity. They become more aware that they're going to be, I guess, leaving the nest a little bit. They come back to the nest and they leave it, and they come back and they leave, right? And so they get into teenage years. At some point, they're going to get into their 20s and they're going to get older. But the thing is that as children are growing, they need to be really, really sure that you are going to be their safe space, that you are always going to be there for them no matter what, and that you will consistently be there. And one way of them learning, like I said, children learn far more through observing you and how you are than they do through the words that you say. So you can say to them, I'm always here for you. And it's a lovely message, don't get me wrong, don't stop saying, I'm not saying stop saying that. But the thing is that actually they need to see it, because actions do speak louder than words, right? And so they need to see it again and again and again and again. And so they really need to be ultra sure, because as they grow older, they also experience more risky situations, right? So they start going on dates. They might get their heart broken. Then there's the issue around, am I attractive enough? There's the, as they grow older, then the issue around sexual intimacy with other people, and then being more vulnerable, and, and then their career choices and how good enough they are in terms of getting into colleges or universities, or their business ideas, or, all of the stuff that kind of leads as they grow older. But the thing is that they need to be sure that you are going to be consistently there for them, and that you are going to love them, you are going to support them, regardless of what it is that they're going through. And so something I really voiced to my clients, for you to hold on to this message yourself, but also if you're a parent to support your child with this, is that your behaviors and you as a human being are totally 2 different things. You are not your actions. And I think the whole message of like, you are what you do, or however it is it's framed, I feel like that's quite unhealthy, because the thing is that you can do certain things. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good in terms of being healthy or unhealthy. But the thing is that you are still valid as a human being, whether or not you do X, Y, and Z, right? Yeah. So let's say, I think if you think about kids, sometimes it makes the concept a bit easier. So for instance, if your child doesn't do their homework, it doesn't mean that they're bad. I know some people say like, oh yeah, you're really naughty, you didn't do your homework. No. The child is still loved by you. You still love your child. The child is still a valid human. The child is still infinitely worthy. You don't like not doing homework. You prefer the action of doing homework. But that doesn't mean that your child is naughty. Let's say if your kid, I don't know, breaks a window, the breaking of the window, that's the bad behavior, but your child isn't inherently bad. in that moment. And so I suppose it's almost, and you know, when you're applying it to yourself, because I think a lot of business owners really struggle with this concept in the sense of, if I've not hit my target, if I've not hit my 6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure, whatever income target, or I've not recruited this number of clients, I've not sold this number of sales, if I've not done X, Y, and Z, then I am shit, then I am not good enough, then I am unworthy. And that is something that's a really dangerous place to be in. And you can spiral pretty fast if you're in that place.
Yeah, I love what you just said then, because, and it's really, really interesting. It's cute, but I have a story which shows something. One of my 4-year-olds, when she gets annoyed, it's okay for her to be upset if I don't let her have another biscuit or whatever. Like, she's allowed to feel however she wants to feel. You know, she doesn't have to like me putting a boundary in place. And her biggest insult for me and Tom, we're trying to crack down on at the moment, but her biggest insult to me is, "You're naughty, mummy." And that's so cute that's like the worst thing that she could tell me. But that shows her fear, isn't it? She fears being naughty. And like, that's why it's so important to internalize for kids and adults that we are not our actions. So that's a really, really good point. And what I'd just love to bring home, and I'd love for your take on it as well, is that life is a reflection of our belief systems, because our brain is always filtering out what's around us and looking for evidence of what we believe to be true. So the situations, the people that you're attracting into your life, that literally the situations, the drama that is happening in your business right now, for example, if you're getting your boundaries pushed or whatever it is, all of life is a mirror. So when something is happening, and it's not happening to you, it's happening for you, in order for you to grow and evolve, ask yourself, why is this challenging situation happening? And what is it reflecting in me that feels uncomfortable, that needs healing? And when you can identify that and do that work, you evolve and you heal those limiting beliefs, you do that healing work. And you just watch how life gets easier, because you don't attract those hard, boundary pushing, challenging scenarios in the same way, because you've healed from them. Your subconscious doesn't attract those situations in anymore because you don't believe that those are right for you. Like, you increased your self-worth. So you feel like you completely embody this feeling of being worth more. So you're not available for those shitty situations that you were getting before. So it's just so game-changing.
It's not even a question. It's not even a question in terms of, am I worthy to experience this or not? It's not even a question. It's you transcend to a place where your worth is infinite. So you're really leaning into your essence, but also it's a simple no.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you come from a place where it feels clean, and that's it. It's not even something to kind of have this internal debate over, because you've cleared out the trash, basically.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it's so true. Like, I do not struggle with people testing my boundaries, because the way you feel about yourself is conveyed with your energy and your nonverbal communication. And so we're always subconsciously reading each other's nonverbal communication. And as human beings, we innately push boundaries. So when we feel where someone's boundary is, we know what we can get away with and what we can't get away with. And so the power of doing this work is amazing. We do need to wrap it up fairly soon. I'm really sorry, guys, just to be transparent. I need to go and pick my kids up from nursery. But Sarah, this is a great conversation, and I'm pretty sure Sarah and I are going to have another conversation in the future. So watch this space. But in the meantime, Sarah, where can people look you up? Where can they find you? And if you've got anything you'd like to share with them, please go ahead.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I'm actually changing my handle name to Sarah Alsawy-Davies, bit of a mouthful there. But you can find me on my website, which is healtoxicrelationships.com. And on there as well, I've got a couple of freebies. So I've got my free ebook, which I would love to share with your audience. And in there are 10 steps in terms of how it is that you can heal that inner wound, that child in you that has developed from these traumas.
Amazing. We're going to put all of that information in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. And yeah, thank you, listeners. See you all next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bigger Than You podcast. If you found it valuable, please forward it to others who you think might benefit from listening, and be sure to subscribe to get the new episodes when they release. And if you're listening on iTunes, please leave a rating or a review, as it really helps the show to grow. You can find me on LinkedIn, Jenna Holloway, or on TikTok and Instagram, and my handle is @IamJennaHolloway. And you can find links to whatever we cover in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.